Good evening, and welcome to this special edition of Facebook Live here on blackdoctor.org. I am Ellis Dean, of course, a representative of blackdoctor.org, and I am excited to bring this program to you tonight because, as you know, the elephant in the room is COVID. We know it's still out there, and we know the Delta variant is running rampant all over the country. But that's not what we're here to talk about. Tonight, we're going to talk about a new series that we're rolling out for y'all. And this is the first episode of that series. And this series is called Operation Life Back to Basics. And basically what we're going to do with this series is we're going to break down those issues, those topics, those things that affect Black and brown people the most. We have the most dire outcomes. We have the most people affected by it. And we're going to break them down so you can be better armed with the information you need when you go into your primary care physician, and so you can understand those conditions better so you're better equipped to treat and overcome them, right? So all we're about is, our motto here is, well, wellness and culture connect. Well, this is the wellness piece, and we're going to give you the information that you need to be well. So before we begin, what I'd like for you to do is to drop in the comments where you are watching us from. We always like to know where people are watching us from so we can give your city and state a shout out. Also, if you have any questions as we're going through tonight's presentation, we've got a wonderful specialist here on tonight, heart specialist here on with us tonight to talk about cholesterol. So tonight's topic is cholesterol. Everything you need to know, what all the L's before, the HDL, LDL, super L, double L, triple L, whatever the L you want to know about, we're going to learn about it tonight, and we're going to get you all the information you need to overcome that big, bad cholesterol. So I have said enough. I'm going to bring on our guest. So this is Dr. Maria Sankasati. She is a heart specialist I think she's out of Jackson Memorial Hospital in Miami, Florida. I see her head nodding. Yes, she is. I remember that from when I talked to her before. And she is a wonderful, she's been on our program before. She's been on Jumping with Junie. So if you watched Junie's show on Thursday, she's been on that program a couple of times. And she is a wonderful, wonderful heart specialist. And I like to bring her on so you can see her and not look at me anymore. Good evening, Dr. Sankasati. How are you? Thank you for joining us.
Of course. Good evening, Ellis. Good evening to everyone out there who's watching. Thank you for joining us.
Well, the first question out the box is, what is cholesterol?
So cholesterol is a kind of a fatty, waxy substance that your body makes, and your body uses it. So every single cell in your body, so whether it's a cell in your skin, whether it's in your brain, your liver, wherever, your muscles, needs cholesterol to form what we call the cell membrane. That's the wrapping around the cell, kind of the wrapping paper around it that keeps it together. So cholesterol is a type of fat that is found in every single cell membrane in your body. So it's rampant. Our body needs it. Our body needs it to survive. And our body makes it naturally to supply that need that we have. We also use cholesterol to make things like vitamins, certain hormones in our body, and to make certain things that help us to digest our food. So cholesterol is a really important substance that our body needs in order to survive. The problem becomes when we have it in excess and have it too much.
So you just blew my mind off the gate, right? So our body needs cholesterol. And I've always been taught that cholesterol is bad for you. So help us really understand how we need something that we've always been taught that's bad for us.
Exactly. So your body definitely needs cholesterol. But the thing that's beautiful about our bodies is our body knows exactly how much we need. So cholesterol is made by our liver, which is an organ in our stomach. And the liver will make exactly as much cholesterol that your body needs to make all these hormones, to make all these vitamins, and to make these digestive enzymes and to coat the cells of our bodies. So cholesterol is gotten a bad rap because of what happens when cholesterol gets too high. But cholesterol is actually an essential part of us being who we are, right? Our cells where our bodies are made up of billions and billions of cells, and every single cell in our body has cholesterol in it. And that's not just for humans, that's for all the animals and mammals out there. So it's not just something unique to humans. Cholesterol is ubiquitous in our society and in our bodies, and we need it. The problem is, and why we think of cholesterol as being something bad, is because we tend to have it in excess. So our body makes all the cholesterol that we need. The problem is we tend to take in a lot more than our body can handle. And when we do that, that cholesterol now becomes a problem because it doesn't have anywhere to go. Our liver said, I made enough. I gave you everything you needed. You went out looking for more, and now that's a problem. So I'm sure there's so many other scenarios in life you can apply that to. But for cholesterol, that's the same thing as well. And the bad rap that it's gotten is because when cholesterol is in your body in excess, and that's mostly 90+% of the time, it's because we're eating too much cholesterol in our diet. And when we do that, that cholesterol doesn't have anywhere to go because our liver makes everything we need. So it circulates around in our bloodstream and it gets into our blood vessels and causes what we call plaque. And plaque, when it combines in our blood vessels, leads to inflammation. And that two things, cholesterol and inflammation, is the impetus behind plaque formation, or if you've heard the word atherosclerosis, or cardiovascular disease, so things that lead to heart attacks and strokes. So that's really why cholesterol has gotten that bad rap, despite the fact that we definitely do need it to survive. We just don't need the amount that we tend to take in our diets.
Okay, so we know our body produces cholesterol. Mm-hmm. We know that we're ingesting when we talk about cholesterol being bad, is because we're ingesting cholesterol, not because it's bad for us, because we need it, because our cells, all of our cells have cholesterol in it. So we've got that information. That's great to know. So I understand there's two types of cholesterol. What are those two types of cholesterol?
So the two main types of cholesterol, one other thing before we move on to that is I will say that there's a small percentage of people, and some people may fall into this category, where yes, your body and your liver knows exactly how much cholesterol to make. There are certain people where your body overproduces cholesterol. Now, I tend to hear other people, when they come back to the office with high cholesterol numbers, they say, no, it's not my diet. It's just my body overproducing that. Like, that is the rarer percentage. So it's a much less amount of people who actually have what we call genetic diseases or genetic problems where their body just overproduces that. And those people tend to have early histories in their family or in themselves of having heart attacks or strokes at a much younger age. And so that's kind of the smaller minority of people. So when we talk about the two types of cholesterols, the two main types that you're going to hear is LDL cholesterol, and what that stands for is low density lipoprotein. And the other form is HDL, or high density lipoprotein. LDL and HDL. I want you to think of LDL as the bad type of cholesterol. I tend to put a little devil on the chart when people say their LDL cholesterol is high. And your HDL, we tend to term your good cholesterol. And the reason that these terms come together, this is how cholesterol is carried around in the body in these two particles, LDL and HDL. And the LDL, we call it the bad cholesterol because when that accumulates, that's the one that gets put into your bloodstream and into your blood vessels and creates inflammation that can lead to plaque buildup or the development of atherosclerosis. So when your LDL levels are very high or out of control, that can be a very big problem. Why do we call HDL good cholesterol? Well, part of the job of HDL is that it takes that bad cholesterol from the blood vessel walls and actually tries to take it back to the liver so the liver can process it. So we think of it as a scavenger. It's going into the arteries and saying, okay, you don't belong here. Let me take it out and bring it back to the liver so the liver can process it. So it in some ways can help to decrease the amount of cholesterol that's causing these plaques. So we want your LDL cholesterol to be as low as possible, and you want your HDL cholesterol to usually be on the higher side. You definitely don't want it to be low. So that's the difference between the LDL and the HDL, why we consider one bad and why we consider one good.
Okay, so we got HDL and LDL. HDL is good, LDL is bad. What is the good ratio? What's a good number for people to say, okay, if my total cholesterol is this, I need to be concerned or ask some additional questions?
So when you go to your doctor to get your cholesterol level checked, there's a few numbers that you're going to get back when they review your blood tests with you. You're going to get back, the first number is usually your total cholesterol. That's going to measure your HDL and LDL, and then some other very smaller types of cholesterols that aren't as important to emphasize. And then it's going to give you the breakdown of LDL, HDL, and also give you your triglyceride level, which is a fat content in the blood. It's a little bit different than cholesterol. So those are the four numbers you're going to get. So the one thing that your eye should go through automatically is your total cholesterol. And you really want that number to be less than 200. So you really want your total cholesterol to be less than 200. If you see that it's over 200, then you need to sit and have a conversation with your doctor about what that means and what is your ratio of LDL to HDL and how that could be affecting your health. One thing to say up front is that, yes, the total cholesterol less than 200 is your general rule of thumb. But when it comes to cholesterol numbers, you really need to sit and speak with your doctor because this needs to be individualized to every single person. I can't tell you today what is a good LDL and what's a bad LDL. We know the lower the better, because LDL is bad. We know it deposits into your arteries, it causes plaque buildup, and so we want that number as low as possible. But what is low for one person may not necessarily be low for another person, or what's considered acceptable for one person is not acceptable for another. So those numbers really have to be individualized. But once your total cholesterol starts to go over 200, the red flag should start going off. You should start feeling that uncomfortable feeling, and you got to get to your doctor to talk about what that really means for you.
Okay, so and you mentioned plaque a couple of times, plaque buildup. Is there any way, if that plaque starts to build up, is there any way to get rid of that plaque once it starts filling in the arteries? Is there a way to get rid of it, or is it just there for? Okay.
Yes, if there wasn't, we'd all be in big trouble. So plaque starts in the arteries, and it can start in the arteries of the heart. It can start in the arteries of the brain that leads to a stroke. Arteries of the heart leads to heart attacks. But it can develop in any arteries, in the legs, in the arms, and anywhere in the body. Once that plaque starts to form, it creates inflammation, and that kind of snowballs itself and gets worse and worse, unless you do something to change that. And a lot of times that can involve diet, so lifestyle things to do. So we'll talk about some diet and exercise ways to help that. I already see that there's a question about, can exercise take away some excess cholesterol? And yes, that's one of the part of the ways that we can try to decrease some of the cholesterol in our blood. And then depending on other factors that you have to sit and talk about with your doctor, medications may also help to reverse some of that high cholesterol, but also reverse some of that plaque. So what I have seen patients where we have looked at their arteries, we've seen plaque buildup that's causing significant blockages in their arteries. And they may say, I don't want any other treatment right now other than just lifestyle and diet and exercise. And I've seen these plaques, what we call regress or get less, with people really paying attention to their health and going above and beyond to make sure that they do the things they need to get that down. So yes, plaque can get better, and that's the good news. If there was no good news, then this would be a very depressing conversation. But there's lots of good news in terms of being able to reverse that plaque and that damage from high cholesterol.
Well, that is good news for me, because as I was sharing to you before we came on air, is that I have high cholesterol. My number is over 200. I'm not going to tell y'all exactly what it is. That's TMI. But let's just suffice it to say it is over 200. And I have not yet to this date. And so that is just because, as you were alluding to, which is why you can't give a number in terms of what is the right ratio between HDL and LDL, is because it is individually based. And so it's based on other factors like, do you smoke, drink, do you have any other medical conditions like diabetes or hypertension that could exacerbate cholesterol? How much are you exercising? What are your other numbers like your blood pressure and whatnot? And so that's why it's such an individually defined characteristic. So 200 is just a number to kind of start, ballpark number, but you really should think about the other risk factors that you might have, that you might be engaging in your life, and have that conversation with your doctor to get an assessment. And so thankfully, I'm still off of medications, but so I'm going to continue to do what I need to do, and that is my diet. So what are some things that we can continue to eat, that people can eat, or people can change their diet habits to help them keep their cholesterol level and even potentially lower their cholesterol over time?
Yes, exactly. So our goal is to lower that cholesterol, lower that amount of LDL that's going around and creating that plaque, right? And eventually being able to decrease that plaque so that doesn't lead to things like heart attacks and strokes. And we know the incidence, especially in Black or brown people, is higher for heart attacks and strokes, especially when you have cholesterol in combination with hypertension or things like that. So you're very right by saying that treatment has to be individualized. You have to go to your doctor. You have to sit and talk about your numbers. Because if you come in, I'll give you an example. Say someone's cholesterol is 250 and their LDL is 170 and their HDL is very low. Well, if that person is a 70-year-old smoker with diabetes who had a stroke, 100% bet they're going to end up on medications, because we have to look at those other features. But if that same person is a 30-year-old who doesn't have high blood pressure, who's never smoked, who's otherwise healthy, we can have the talk about diet and exercise and give them some time to make change. So you have to really look at the number of the cholesterol and then apply it to the person. So the first thing I usually try to do before you get someone on medications is to really educate them about what they can do, what they can empower themselves to do to really make that change. And a lot of that starts with diet and making sure that you're eating the right things, but making sure you're also avoiding the things that you know you shouldn't be eating. And a lot of this is nothing, it's not stuff you've not heard before. This is, I'm not gonna have any great revelations tonight, but I think it makes sense. And if you remember what I said when we asked what cholesterol is located in the cells of every single animal. So when you eat animal-based foods, so meat, beef, lamb, chicken, poultry, those duck, etc., pork, all of that has a lot of cholesterol in it. So if you limit the amount of animal-based meat that you're eating, automatically you're going to decrease the amount of cholesterol you're taking in. Counter to that, if you're going to eat more plant-based or more fish, because that has a different type of fat in their cells, then that's going to improve your overall cholesterol numbers. So if we think of cholesterol as being located in the cells of all animals, well, the more animal products you eat, the more you're likely to have higher cholesterol levels. Seafood as well has a lot of cholesterol in it. Egg yolks have a lot of cholesterol in it. So there's certain little substitutes that you can make. You know, I buy egg whites now, or if I'm boiling an egg, I eat most of the egg white and take out most of the yolk to know that I'm lowering the cholesterol level there. And then just making sure that you're eating the right kind of fats as well, because it's not just making sure you're limiting cholesterol in your diet. It's also making sure that you're not taking in a lot of fat that gets converted to or works with cholesterol to cause damage and cause plaque. So there's different types of fats, specifically saturated fat. So if you're looking at a label of food products, things that say saturated fat or trans fats, those really should be avoided in your diet. And unsaturated fat tends to be a little bit healthier. So what has saturated fat? That's the fat that you want to avoid. Animal-based meats tends to have a lot of fats, a lot of saturated fats. Seafood, like shellfish, tends to have a lot of saturated fat. Dairy products, because it comes from, an animal, tends to have a lot of saturated fat in it. So cutting or limiting those things, if you're able to cut them out completely, all the better for you. But if you're able to limit them or make sure that you're preparing them in a way where you're decreasing the amount of fat in them. So if you're using chicken, take off the skin, because a lot of that fat and layer is underneath the skin. Making sure you're trimming all the extra fat from around the chicken or the meat as possible. And then using cooking techniques where you're not, frying it, right? Frying it in more oil or in grease. So that's gonna add insult to injury there. But baking it. And what I actually do is I have like a rack that I use. So I put the chicken on top of the rack, and then, or if I'm making beef or lamb, and then you can see the fat actually dripping down into the pan underneath. So that will help to kind of give you some practical ways of, yes, cutting back on the animal-based proteins that you're eating, but also making sure that you're preparing them in a way that you're choosing leaner cuts of meat, that you're trying to avoid the excess fat from, like, say, chicken skin or things like that, and then preparing them in a way that it's healthier, that you're going to get rid of a lot of that excess fat from getting into your diet and into your food. And then making sure that you're also eating things that have lower cholesterol. So sticking with fruits, vegetables, high fiber foods will help to introduce the right kind of fats into your diet, because you do still need some sort of fat there, but also make sure that you're not getting excess amount of cholesterol. Because remember, our body already makes, our liver is smart. It already makes everything we need. So everything that we're taking in our diet is excess. And so if you look at cultures that eat predominantly more plants than we tend to do in Western cultures, their cholesterol levels barely get above 200 because their diet just does the right thing for them. Right. It's just that in Western cultures, and especially in Black cultures, we tend to have more fat content in our food than we need to, and that's what's healthy for us. It's a hard lifestyle change, but for people who are willing to stick to it and really put in the work to increase healthy fruits and vegetables and high fiber foods in your diet, you're really going to reap the benefits of that down the road. Especially if this is something that runs in your family, especially if you've had a prior heart attack or a stroke, or if you've already been told, look, your cholesterol is high and you gotta kick into gear. You gotta do something different. If not, I don't want you to be my patient, right? I love my patients, I love my job, but I don't want to see you in my office for that reason. I want to sit and have these conversations with you and try to help you find practical ways to introduce healthy foods so that we're talking about this, 20 years from now and still keeping Ellis off of his cholesterol medication.
So when you say high fiber foods, is that because the fiber food help your body expel the plaques or the bad cholesterol? Is that why we're adding high fiber foods? Because I can get the fruits and vegetables and things like that that don't have a lot of cholesterol in them or don't have any
Yep.
cholesterol in them.
Hmm.
But the high fiber foods, is that the same, or do high
So,
fiber foods have a more?
so high soluble fiber. So fiber, there's two types of fibers, soluble and insoluble, and I won't get into kind of the details on those. But if you're eating foods that have higher fiber content, that fiber tends to bind the cholesterol in your bloodstream and helps your body get rid of it in the stool, right? So you can actually naturally through some of your foods not just bring in less cholesterol, right, by avoiding the things that you shouldn't, but eating foods
Right.
that have higher soluble fibers, you can help get rid of the cholesterol, and help counteract some of that. Because unless you're going to go to a completely, vegan diet, you're going to have some cholesterol in your diet. And so
Okay.
if you have to be able to counteract that through eating the right kind of foods that can help to limit the amount of cholesterol that gets absorbed into your bloodstream, that will get absorbed into your arteries and cause plaque. And then also the other part of that is also making sure you're exercising enough and getting rid of some of that excess fat and calories as well.
Okay. So, actually, lose weight by exercising. So it gets rid of some of the excess fat that could already be in your body. High
Mm-hmm.
fiber foods just binds with the cholesterol and helps you, you know, get rid of the cholesterol on your own. And so high fiber foods would be like oatmeal, natural oatmeal, not the prepackaged stuff that you get.
Yep.
Oatmeal, I've learned is a high fiber, very good food to eat, especially in the morning time. You can go ahead and get it. So
Yeah.
because that was one of the questions. What are the high fiber foods? So I know those are two that I know, Millicent. So I will let
Yeah,
them.
so oats and oat brands, people tend to, they advertise the heck out of that. So I think they've brained that into our minds. But some other things, so certain types of fatty fishes, so salmon, trout, tuna, nuts and seeds tend to have a lot of good fiber in them as well as beans. So lentils, chickpeas, things like that have a lot of soluble fats and soluble fiber in them that will help to lower that cholesterol naturally. So eating or making sure that your diet has a balanced amount of fruits, vegetables, and those kind of soluble fibers will counteract the animal protein intake that you're taking in. It won't counteract it 100%. And that's why you have to make sure that if you're going to eat meat, you're going to eat animal protein, you got to do it in a way that's smart. Choosing leaner cuts, making sure that you're cutting off the fat, and making sure that you're preparing it in a way that's healthier. So baking your food, steaming, grilling instead of frying. Frying is I rarely will eat fried foods anymore. As much as I love it, I have to think long term, right? I want to think 30, 40 years down the road and not think about having to worry about being on cholesterol medication. So,
Okay. So I'm gonna keep it. I'm gonna keep it real. As we say in that community, I'm gonna keep it real. So y'all know some of y'all might have that cup of bacon dripping that's in your refrigerator. That's in your refrigerator. I got one now because I understand it. I make some bacon. I pour the drippings off. And you see how it gets hard. Now, what I've been told is imagine that in your arteries, right? So every time you pull that fat, if you fry a hamburger, there's all that grease laid that's still in the pot. If you just let that pot sit with the grease in it, that grease is going to harden from the burgers. It's going to get thicker and it's going to get hardened. That's what happens in your arteries when you eat all of that fat, right?
yeah.
In the foods. And so you've got to get that out of your body. Don't ingest it. Don't ingest it in the first place. Get it out of your diet. So therefore you will have less chance and you can lower your cholesterol with that.
Yeah, that's a great example. I use that with patients all the time. I'm like, what happens when you put that meat in the fridge and you see that gravy and you see that layer of fat on the top? Take it off. We did this the other day. I love lamb. That's my sin meat. I love to eat it, but it's very, very fatty. And so when we made a stew the other day and we boiled it and I let it sit for a little bit and I scraped off that top layer of fat. So you have to try and be smart about getting rid of it, being practical. I try to be practical with people because I know that if I tell them don't eat that lamb again, even for myself, somebody think I know that I like, it's probably not going to happen. So you have to think about practical ways to do it so that people won't turn away from what you're saying, and making sure that it's palatable. So you can incorporate it into your everyday life instead of saying, well, this is too hard, I'm not going to do it. So hopefully I see one comment in here that I actually want to comment on. Someone said, what about an air fryer? I love my air fryer. So it doesn't use the oils and the grease that is inside the, that people tend to cook with if you're frying traditionally. So it does avoid that component of it. but you have to also make sure you're not putting meat in there that has a ton of fat in it anyways, or making sure that you're using a rack inside there so that it drips out. So the air fryer is a great alternative, or it's a good alternative, I should say, to making your meat a little bit more healthy.
Absolutely. So here's another question while we're here. We got from YouTube. Knowing that bad cholesterol stays in your bloodstream, what happens to the good cholesterol?
So the good cholesterol, that HDL cholesterol, it will scavenge the LDL cholesterol from the artery. So it actually goes into the arterial wall, it takes that cholesterol out, and it circulates in your blood back to your liver. And then your liver will process that and naturally get rid of the excess cholesterol that it doesn't need. So that's why having higher levels of HDL, or that good cholesterol, is considered good, because it does that more often. The story of HDL cholesterol, though, isn't as simple and as beautiful as just being good. The main thing you want to make sure is that it's not low, because having low HDL cholesterol usually is a problem. Having very high HDL cholesterol we think is probably good, but it hasn't totally panned out that way. But we still use the label good cholesterol because we want it to never be low. We want it to be as high as possible. We want to make sure that that number stays. Usually, if you're looking at specifics, HDL for a man, you want it above 40, and for women, you want it above 50. So if you see those numbers less than that, you got to be careful, and you got to start thinking about ways to raise that number up. Exercise is actually a really good way to raise your HDL cholesterol. So exercise will help to get rid of excess cholesterol, because it's going to raise that good cholesterol, raise your HDL, and then help scavenge that bad cholesterol out of the arteries back into the liver so that your liver can process it. And also, quitting smoking is also a very good way to raise your HDL cholesterol. So if someone's a smoker and they get their cholesterol checked and that HDL is low, exercise and making sure to do everything you can to quit smoking will help to raise that HDL. That will help to overall decrease the amount of plaque that your body's making, and overall just be healthier for you long term.
That's good. That was a great question. That's why I wanted to get that in there, and also a great answer in terms of how can you increase your HDL naturally, right? So exactly. Again, understanding, that's why I put it out here on the screen. HDL for men, you need to be above 40. For women, you need to be above 50. But don't just go around trying to make it as high as possible. Because again, as we said at the beginning of the program, and we're talking cholesterol here with Dr. Sankasani from Jackson Memorial Center down in Miami, Florida, if you're just joining us. But what we said at the beginning of the program is your body makes all the cholesterol that it needs, okay? And it surrounds you, sits in every cell in your body. That's why your body doesn't need cholesterol. Your body makes it in the liver. So anything that's above that is something that we're ingesting from what we eat. And so we've got to make sure that we're monitoring how much cholesterol we actually put into our bodies and keep that number as low as possible. All right. So, all right. So I know we got to talk about it. So I'm going to talk about just a little bit about it. So if somebody gets that cholesterol gets high, and they're having a hard time managing it on their own through diet and exercise, what are some of the medications that are available that they can take to help regulate and lower their cholesterol?
So usually we'll give someone about 3 to 4 months to really put in that hard ditch effort and make those lifestyle changes before we'll recheck your cholesterol. Sometimes I give people longer than that, because I know reality is it's really hard to make a huge lifestyle change like that in just 3 to 4 months. But if we've given you enough time and your cholesterol numbers aren't budging, or worse, they're going up, and we haven't really shown that sustainable change, then there are really good medications that we can use to help lower the cholesterol. And one other thing that we look at when we think about cholesterol medicines is I don't want to just lower your cholesterol number. I want to make sure we're lowering your cholesterol, lowering your plaque, and lowering your risk of having heart disease. Okay. So when we think about cholesterol medications, there's several of them. And if you went on Google and you said cholesterol medication, there's a ton that's going to pop up. But you want to make sure that you speak with your doctor about using medications that not just lower cholesterol, but also prevent you from having things like heart attacks or strokes. Or I shouldn't say prevent, decrease your risk, because we can't always 100% prevent things, but we can decrease our risk of having those. And the number one class of medicines, a common name, a lot of people have heard it, are statin medications. Statin medications are called that because the generic names all end in statin. So there's different types. You know, the common ones you'll hear commercials for before they went generic. So Lipitor, Crestor, a lot of them are generic now, which is good. That means that they're cheaper to obtain. But statin medications are really the cornerstone of treating cholesterol, especially from a cardiologist perspective, because it decreases someone's risk of having a heart attack or stroke. Or if they've had a heart attack or stroke, it decreases the future risk of having a second or third one, which is really, really important. So statin medications are by far and away the most used and probably the ones that have the best data. If that's the first line medication to be used, there are others that we can add on to that. So there may be times where people have to be on more than one. They can be on 2 pills. And nowadays, for people who have really high cholesterol, and those are usually people who have the familial form. So they have those genetic forms where their body just naturally produces too much. There's actual injection medications like insulin, kind of like how you have to inject medications for cholesterol nowadays that can help to lower it. So we don't want to get there. And that's why we really emphasize diet and lifestyle. But if you fall into that category where you're really trying your hardest, you've really made that change, you've done everything that we spoke about today, and your cholesterol levels really aren't getting under control, then there are things that we can do to decrease your numbers, right, to make them look better on the lab results. But at the end of the day, that's only one part of the problem. We don't want you to have good labs and have a heart attack. We want to make sure that you have good labs and don't have any heart problems that you don't end up having to see me in the office for in the future. So there are lots of options for medications. Those have to be really talked about with your doctor. Go over the side effects, go over the potentials, issues that you could encounter. Most of them are very, very safe and well tolerated. So if your doctor does advise you to take these medications, it's usually for a good reason. Make sure you have a good understanding of why. Make sure you know what your goal is for your cholesterol. So once you get started on cholesterol medications, the next question people say, well, how long do I have to take them? Is this for life? And that also depends on what's the reason you have to go on it. So those things are individualized. If you can really push and make a diet change, say you really are honest with yourself and you say, man, I didn't really try hard in that 3 to 6 months. I know I need to try harder. But in the meantime, so that my cholesterol doesn't cause a problem, I can start taking medications, really push that lifestyle change, and then hope to be able to get off of it. Okay. Especially for people who are overweight or obese. A lot of times when people are able to lose a significant amount of weight and to get their body mass index or their BMI down to a certain level, usually less than 25 or less than 30 for sure, we can see cholesterol levels come down and people get off their medications. So hopefully this is a push for people to realize that these medications sometimes don't have to be lifelong. For certain people and certain conditions, they do. And they will. And I'll be very honest with people up front. Yes, this for you is going to be lifelong. Even if you make all the dietary changes, we know that this is the best thing for you. But really, lifestyle and the changes in your diet, exercising, making sure you quit smoking if you're a smoker, can really just be enough to get your cholesterol number where they need to be.
Okay, so it's a lot. So I'm going to recap some things here. Cholesterol is naturally in your body. Your liver produces it, and you don't really need to ingest it. When you ingest it, that's when things start throwing your numbers off. There are 2 main types of cholesterol. There's HDL, which is your good cholesterol. That helps clear out the bad cholesterol, which is the LDL.
Exactly.
Also, because it's in animal cells, when we eat meat, that's when we're getting the bad cholesterol. That's when we're getting all that cholesterol from the fats. And so there's ways to lower that by reducing the amount of animal products that you eat, particularly like shellfish and things of that nature that are higher in cholesterol. Also, if you're going to eat chicken, take the skin off and eat the more leaner cuts of chicken and things of that nature. Skim the fat off. Use an air fryer. Help in terms of lowering the amount of fat if you're going to eat meat, because we're going to be realistic. We like to eat. We like to have a little meat with our food sometimes. And then we talked about medications and statins being important, but also that is a conversation you need to have with your doctor because it's individually based in terms of, but just make sure you're taking a medication that's not just for cholesterol, but it's going to help lower the risk of other complications from having high cholesterol. And that includes heart attacks and strokes and other things. Did I do a good job summarizing?
That's a great summary. That's a great summary, Ellis. Thank you. That's a great
I like to recap because people join at different times in the program and they want to, kind of want to make sure that we got people since we're about 30 minutes in here. So the other elephant in the room we have to talk about is what happens if we don't control our cholesterol. What are some of the potential illnesses and bad effects that could happen if we have our high cholesterol go unchecked?
So as we spoke about, that high cholesterol, if it goes unchecked, if you're not doing the diet and lifestyle choices, if you're not taking the medications appropriately, that cholesterol is going to build up in your bloodstream. It's going to end up getting into the arteries of your heart, of your brain, of your legs. And if it gets into the arteries of your brain and cause blockages, those are things that can lead to stroke. And we know stroke can be very, very disabling, if not lethal. It's a very disabling disease. Same thing with heart disease. The arteries of the heart are succumb to the same kind of plaque and problems as the arteries in the brain. Plaque builds up, it causes the artery to be narrowed. So if you're born with an artery that's this thick or this wide open, the blood is flowing through, but then you develop cholesterol plaque and it makes it this thin, then your oxygen isn't circulating the way it needs to in the arteries, and that can lead to heart attacks. And heart attacks, as we know, can be very dangerous. It can make the heart very weak, and people can die at the time of heart attack or years later from complications afterwards. And then it can also develop blockages in the arteries of the legs, things that can lead to amputations or things that can lead to ulcers that don't heal on your legs. So there's lots of complications that we don't want to even have to think about from having high cholesterol that goes unchecked. So implementing these things and getting your cholesterol checked at an early age. So that's one thing we hadn't talked about, Ellis, that I think is important to emphasize, is that when should we start checking cholesterol? So I'm an adult doctor, but there's some guidelines for pediatricians that if people have a family history, if you're taking your kid to a pediatrician and you know heart disease runs in your family at an early age, they're even checking children younger than, you know, in their preteen years for high cholesterol if that family history is there. But everyone starting at age 20 should at least get their cholesterol checked every 5 years if you don't have any other risk factor. So if heart disease doesn't run in your family, if you don't have diabetes, if you've never had a heart attack or stroke, at minimum, you should be checking your cholesterol at least every 5 years. A lot of times it's going to be more often if you have high blood pressure, if you have diabetes, if you've ever had a heart attack or stroke. A lot of times we check your cholesterol numbers probably a few times a year to make sure you're keeping up with your diet, make sure you're keeping up with your medications, because you're much higher risk of that cholesterol causing a problem than someone who doesn't have those issues or those problems. So starting at 20 years old, so that's pretty young. You know, we think of a lot of times people at 20 years old, they're transitioning off of their pediatrician, they're in college, and they're not really thinking about having to go to their primary care and get their cholesterol checked. But it's really important to start young, because when we, unfortunately, look at the arteries of people, even healthy people in their 20s and 30s, we already start to see that plaque building up. And we know that has a lot to do with the diet that we're eating. It starts early. This is not a process that starts in your 40s and 50s. So you shouldn't pay attention to it in your 40s and 50s. That's when people tend to start going to the doctor, right? Because there's, especially for, you know, you've got other things to screen for and other things to look for. But this is a process that starts young. And so we really do recommend starting at age 20, make a visit to the doctor. And if you have children that are in that age group and they haven't been there yet, make sure they get their cholesterol checked and that everything is okay.
Wow. Okay. So starting at age 20. So you're right. At age 20, I wasn't thinking about going to the doctor and getting my cholesterol checked. I was thinking about going to the wing spot and getting a twin-piece lemon pepper.
Exactly. And that's why I think, you know, a lot of times we miss the boat. And so it's really important to start screening at an earlier age, because this is something that we harp on. You know, when I get a young, healthy someone in my office, I was speaking with someone the other day who was in the military who they had to get a cardiac evaluation. And I was like, perfect, prime person to sit and go to my soapbox and talk about diet and exercise and make sure they weren't smoking and make sure I, you know, sent their cholesterol labs and everything, because we really got to start younger. If not, we miss the boat.
So I'll be remiss if I didn't ask this question. I don't know if you saw it. What about avocado? Is avocado part of those foods that we could eat to help regulate and lower our cholesterol? Yeah,
so avocado has more of an unsaturated fat, which doesn't have as much cholesterol raising issues as saturated fat. So the fats you really want to avoid are the saturated and trans fats. I think actually in 2018, the Food and Drug Administration actually outlawed trans fats. So you should not be seeing trans fats on labels. But avocado has unsaturated fat, which is considered healthy for you, similar like to olive oil, right? People will say it's still oil. So is it really that good for you or not? Well, it's an unsaturated fat. So if you had to choose of the healthier versions, avocado is considered a healthier version of fat. And so are things like olive oil and seed and oils that come from vegetables and nuts.
Okay. Okay, that is good to know. All right, so I know we're pushing up on our time, but I
No?
want to ask you, what are some things that people can ask their doctor specifically when they go in for their annual physical and they get their cholesterol checked and they say, doctor comes back and says, hey, your cholesterol is over 200. What are some of you've been diagnosed with high cholesterol. What are the questions you should be asking your doctor immediately?
So before you even ask your doctor, your doctor should be asking you certain things. So when you go for that annual physical, not just should you get your cholesterol checked, right? If you're at risk, you should get your cholesterol checked probably more frequent than the every 5 years they recommend. But they should check your blood pressure. They should also screen at some point for diabetes, and we can do that with blood testing as well. What your doctor should do at that point, part of the individual approach to treating cholesterol is, yes, your cholesterol is high. But if you're a 40-year-old woman or a 45-year-old woman and you have high blood pressure, but your blood pressure is well controlled on medications, there's a calculator that we actually use. And we pull this up, and it's been validated by the American Heart Association and the American College of Cardiology, where we look at age, we look at race, we look at whether someone has high blood pressure or not, and if they're on medications, how well are they controlled. We put in their cholesterol numbers. We find out if they're smokers. We find out if they're diabetic. And then this helps us to put together a risk profile. So what is their risk of having heart disease over the next 10 years? And this is what this tells us. So it takes together all this information and puts it together individually for you to say, what's your risk of having heart disease? So that's where we can look at each individual person and say, yes, you may have high cholesterol, but your risk of having a heart attack over the next 10 years is only about 2%. So until that number starts creeping up, usually about 7 to 8% or so, do we really start saying, okay, this is a red flag, right? This is something that we need to do something about differently than just waiting and watching and seeing what happens. So ask your doctor what your risk score is, right? So if you walk in and you say, what's my cholesterol numbers on my risk score? Your doctor's going to say, oh, you've been reading. So ask them what your risk is. Say, yes, my cholesterol is high, but if I'm 50 years old and I don't have high blood pressure and I never have smoked, how does that cholesterol make my risk look, right? So ask about your risk score, ask them to use all those factors together to come up with a plan. And it's not a hard, fast rule. There's some people who have a risk score of 5%, but if they tell me that their uncle had a heart attack at 55 years old and their father had a heart attack at 50 years old, we look at those other factors too and say, okay, well, maybe there's additional tests we need to do to really see if you're someone who needs to be on medication early or not. So what's your risk score and how do you combine all of those risks together to determine, can I just stick with diet and really get my cholesterol numbers down? Or am I at a phase where my risk is so high, I need to think about medications to lower it?
Good. That's good to know. Well, a risk score. That's why I had to put that on the screen. So don't just ask what your numbers are. Ask what your risk score is, because your risk score is a combination of your numbers and other factors, lifestyle factors, which also says, and I'm going to add this piece in, I'm going to say it so doctor doesn't have to say it, fill out that form that they give you before you see the doctor, fill it out completely and be honest about what you do and what you don't do, how much you drink, do you smoke, how often. You've got to be honest with that, because that goes into your risk score. And if you're not honest on those forms, then that risk score is not going to be computed properly. And something that could have been caught and treated and caught early won't be caught. And that's just because we weren't honest on those forms. So when they give you that stack of forms that I know we hate filling that out, that clipboard, and they say, you got to go sit down and you over there with 10 minutes worth of forms, fill them out completely, honestly, including your family history and your lifestyle questions, so your doctor can make the best risk score assessment. So I said it for you now. You don't have to.
Thank you. No, that's very important, because I tell people all the time, and you see people hesitate when you ask them, well, what have you been eating today? And I'll sometimes ask people to bring me a food diary or tell me, okay, well, what did you eat for breakfast this morning? You see everyone hesitate. They kind of get that look like, oh, she really asked me that. Be honest with us, right? It's not you're not, by not telling us the full truth, it's not doing us any good, right? We want to make sure we're there to help you and really help you implement the changes you need to live a healthier lifestyle. We do no better by not knowing that you had fried chicken last night. And I also tell people to be realistic and honest. If it's your birthday and your favorite thing in the world is fried chicken, not in an air fryer, have it for your birthday. Don't have it again for the rest of the month or the rest of the year if you can avoid it. So we have to still enjoy life. People have their guilty pleasures, and I don't want to deny. I don't want to come out and say completely deny yourself of those things. However, you have to strike that balance. You have to do everything in moderation. And if you're someone who's fighting high cholesterol, it has to be even more than moderation, right? You gotta knock that down to the point where you're making sure you're concentrating on those fruits, those vegetables, and those soluble fibers that we spoke about earlier.
Yes. Overall, you got to make some better eating decisions. And I know sometimes, and at least initially, because we are conditioned to be hooked on sugars and salts. Those are the things and they're the biggest killers, right? In terms of
exactly.
Especially Black and brown people. And those are the things that are the most addictive in everybody's diet. That's no ethnicity on top of that. Those are the biggest risk factors in anybody's diet: too much salt and too much sugar. And so I can say when I was younger, before I got into this thing, I made the mistake one time of going to Popeyes, which is one of my favorite places, the day before my annual physical. So
one other thing, you brought up fast food and eating out. And one tip I try to give people as well: not only will it save you money to cook at home, but it's also going to be healthier because you can control what you're putting in your food. When you go to the restaurant, when you go out to eat, or you go to a fast food joint, it tastes real good for a reason, right? There's a lot of things in there that probably shouldn't be in there. That salt content is going to be off the charts. And if you're someone with high blood pressure, you're going to be very salt sensitive. If you have high cholesterol, it's better to cook your food at home, right? You don't know if they took off the excess fat. You don't know if they cooked it in a pan or they baked it or etc. So it's much better. It's cost saving for one, right? To buy your own food and cook at home, and much healthier. So I will tell people, try to cut down your eating out to maybe 1 or 2 days a week at max. And if you can eat home for most of your meals, you're going to overall see a big difference in not just your weight, because the amount of calories that you will cook with will always be less than what people are going to cook with outside of the home. Right. And you'll see a difference in your cholesterol numbers and your blood pressure. And that will make you realize how much salt, how much cholesterol, how much fat is in food, especially if you're not controlling it yourself.
Yes. So and this is more personal than for anybody else, but they're going to get some information too. So I use sea salt more than table salt. Is that better, or is that just making myself feel better by using sea salt?
It's still sodium. So the problem with salt is the sodium content in it. So sodium is going to drive that blood pressure up. So when you're using simple table salt, that's sodium chloride. If you're using sea salt, it's still sodium chloride. It's just from a different source. So it's still, it kind of came out as a little bit more trendy. People were talking about, I use sea salt. My favorite is the pink Himalayan salt. I'm like, what was the last word you said? Salt. Okay, still has a lot of sodium in it. There are things like salt substitutes, like Mrs. Dash, which actually uses potassium chloride. So if your potassium levels when you go for your blood testing are normal, it's a great salt substitute that still has the salty flavor, not as much, and it has other seasonings in there, but it doesn't have that sodium content. So that's really important, especially for people who have high blood pressure on top of having issues with cholesterol, right? You gotta manage both of them. And if you add diabetes on top of that, now you have to manage your sugar content. So you can see how planning a meal can become quite difficult when you're lowering your cholesterol, lowering the fat, lowering the salt, lowering the sugar. So if we look at what diet is recommended by the American Heart Association, the American College of Cardiology, a plant-based diet is really what's recommended. It doesn't say you have to be vegetarian. Doesn't say you have to be vegan. It says that the basis of your diet should be from fruits, vegetables, whole foods. If you're going to use animal protein, fish tends to be the best, because those are the diets that will help to decrease salt, decrease the amount of sugars, especially simple sugars that you're eating, and decrease cholesterol. So it kind of hits all those 3 points in one diet. So a plant-based diet emphasizes plants, right? Limiting the amount of animal products, which, as we spoke about before, animal products all have cholesterol in them. So it's a all-encompassing diet. It has good research behind it to show that it decreases the risk of heart disease long-term, and that's why it's recommended. A lot of people think it's drastic, but I say it's realistic if you're able to make simple substitutes. Someone put in one of the comments earlier that they love eating lentils with spinach. And I love that too. That tastes great. And so you can find ways to be healthy that can substitute for certain things and do that over time. And you'll realize as you do it more, it becomes easier. If you if you look at it as a huge hurdle, it'll never happen. So finding small ways to incorporate that will really make it more sustainable and make it something that you can do for a lifetime. Because I call it a lifestyle change, because I don't want you to do a diet. It's my enemy word. If you go on a diet, that's to lose weight for your wedding. That's to lose baby fat. That's for short-term goals. But
Right.
really making a lifestyle change is where you're going to see that long-term benefit. And we're talking about long-term. I'm not talking about, just getting ready for something in the next year. We're talking
your
about
high school reunion. We're not getting you ready for your high school reunion. We're not getting you for hot girl summer or whatever. Whatever you got going on, we're trying to make lifestyle changes. And so,
exactly.
That's what we're here for. It just blew my. I was feeling good about my sea salt, because I use less of it because it's a stronger salt flavoring, and so I felt like I tricked myself to make me feeling better about using sea salt, because I always use less, because you still got the. But
that's the power of advertising, right? Advertisers are great for that, but you gotta think about what the background is, right? If it's sodium, it's still gonna raise your blood pressure, so you got to be careful with that.
Like my girl Lilette just said, salt is salt. Okay, I got you.
Exactly.
Right.
Salt, I love that.
Oh my. Okay, so everybody has been echoing what we said. This has been a wonderful conversation. We really have kind of broken down cholesterol into information that people can really understand and take with them, right? So we know, hey, I know my HDL and LDL. HDL is good, LDL is bad, but what's my risk score? So that's something we need to ask on top of that. We've got to be honest on those medical forms, and we're talking to our doctor about the way we engage in our lifestyle as it is today. Not how you want it to be, not how you idealize it to be, but as it is, so you can get an accurate risk score. Exactly. We're also talking about getting rid of those saturated fats and trans fats. I know trans fats out, but we got to get rid of those saturated fats and trans fats. Eat a lot more fruits and vegetables in our lives. The high fiber diets are very, very good. And there's some foods that are really, really good in terms of lowering our overall cholesterol, because they help your body scrape it out, and then you can handle your business and get rid of the bad cholesterol on your own. And so that will help keep you off medication, which is what we're trying to do. We're trying to get you well later on, so you don't have to have that pill bottle that many of our grandparents have had, where you got Monday through Saturday on there about all your pills. We don't want you on that. We want you off of that and living a healthy, productive life as you get older, and understanding how cholesterol works in our body in terms of inflammation with the plaque buildup. Those are the type of things where we're talking about. And I'll put them on the screen. We're trying to reduce heart attacks. We're trying to reduce strokes. We're trying to reduce amputations, ulcers. All of those things are the direct result of that plaque buildup in anywhere in your body. I know sometimes we always focus on the heart, because the heart is the central muscle of the body, but that plaque buildup can be anywhere and cause a problem in any other areas of your body. So you've got to make sure that you are cognizant of those things when we're out there eating. So there's some diets I've been told to get on a Mediterranean diet, so you can look that up. That's a diet that you can possibly do, and also a pescatarian diet, which is basically a fancy way of saying a fish. Fish is the only meat that you'll eat diet. But ultimately, those lifestyle changes are just about eating healthier. Instead of getting a fried chicken, get the baked. Take the skin off before you cook it. If you're going to eat beef, eat steak more so than hamburger, because hamburger is ground up with all the fats in there, and it's hard. You can't get it out. Whereas steak, the fat is around the edge primarily, and so you can reduce your fat intake, because you can cut that fat off and just eat the meat itself. I know there's fat in there, but it's less in steak than there is in ground beef. So there's ways. Get a smaller portion, 6 ounce versus 8, 10, 12. Those big mammoth steaks that you get the 6 ounce, get the 6 ounce portion, and that'll
6 ounce and lots of vegetables around it, right? And then you'll be better off.
Plate full of vegetables and a 6 ounce steak, so you can still get that meat flavoring without overdoing it. Because a lot of times we get that big steak with just a little bit of vegetables. Reverse that trend. Exactly. You'll go a long way in terms of lowering your cholesterol. So I just want to say thank you to Dr. Sakasani. This has been a wonderful, wonderful conversation. Thank you all for joining us this evening and with your questions. Just understand that health is all connected. So when we're talking about cholesterol, we're talking about, people think about heart, but you also think about your brain and how it interacts with other diseases that we might have. Cholesterol and diabetes can be a deadly because now we're talking about more inflammation. Inflammation is a bad thing in your body. Yep.
And there's a lot of things you can do diet-wise to change that inflammation as well. So
yes.
that's super important. And a lot of those diets overlap with what we spoke about to get rid of that high cholesterol level. Also helps to decrease the inflammation. So those two work hand in hand.
Yes. And just understand this, and this is one thing I'm gonna say about COVID. COVID is being known, I've been reading a lot of reports of the vascular illness, and it causes inflammation. And that's why Black and brown people are having more dire effects if they catch COVID, because if you're coming in with hypertension, high cholesterol, or diabetes, you already have inflammation in your body, and the virus is causing more inflammation, and that's why you're seeing the severe reactions in Black and brown populations, because you're already starting at one level of inflammation, and the virus is taking it to the next level, and your body just can't keep up with all that inflammation. Wow. So yes, I'm going to say thank you, Sandra. You're absolutely right. Thank you for all this. Dr. Sankasani, it's always a pleasure. We love to have you here, and we would like to have you back, when we're having this conversation again. I want to thank everybody again for watching this program. Next week, next Tuesday, we got another program, Operation Life, Back to the Basics. We're going to be talking about hypertension, another thing that I'm sure we can have Dr. Sankasani come back. That next week, we've got another doctor coming on, and we're going to talk about hypertension, and we're going to really talk about how we're going to lower that and what effects that can have on the body, and ways that we can lower having high blood pressure, and what blood pressure should be, and ways we can lower it. So don't miss us out next Tuesday, 7 p.m., same place here on blackdoctor.org. And so I will say thank you all for joining us, and we will see you all next time.
Thank you for having me, Ellis. I really appreciate it.